She was paid to be his wife for one night. The billionaire tycoon couldn't let her go. Before starting this story, I'd like to take a moment to ask for your help. If you enjoy the stories we share, please help the channel reach the goal of 1,000 subscribers. I'd be very happy if you could subscribe. Without further delay, let's dive into this emotional story. The fluorescent lights of the downtown Chicago diner flickered overhead as Maya Chen counted her tips for the third time, hoping the numbers would somehow change. $47.32. Not nearly enough to cover her grandmother's medication this month, let alone the overdue rent notice crumpled in her purse. The November wind rattled the windows as she wiped down tables, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. At 26, she looked older. Stress had etched fine lines around her dark eyes, and her once vibrant smile had become a practiced customer service gesture. 3 jobs weren't enough. The part-time bookkeeping course she'd been taking online seemed like a distant dream now. "Excuse me, miss." Maya turned to find a woman in an expensive coat standing by the counter. Everything about her screamed money, from her perfectly styled blonde hair to her designer handbag that probably cost more than Maya made in 6 months. "We're closing in 10 minutes, Maya said, grabbing a menu. "I'm not here for food." The woman's voice was crisp, businesslike. "I'm Victoria Sterling, personal assistant to Alexander Blackwood. I believe you know the name." Everyone in Chicago knew Blackwood Industries. The tech empire had transformed the city's skyline with glass towers bearing the family name. Alexander. Blackwood himself was a constant fixture in financial magazines. Brilliant, ruthless, and notoriously private. "What does this have to do with me?" Maya asked, though her pulse quickened. Victoria placed a business card on the counter. "Mr. Blackwood requires a companion for a business dinner tomorrow night. The compensation is generous, $50,000. Maya's hand froze on the dish rag. "I'm sorry, what?" "It's completely legitimate," Victoria continued smoothly. "A family obligation requires his attendance with a spouse. Unfortunately, his engagement recently ended, and the event is crucial for a merger. You'd pose as his wife for approximately 4 hours. You want me to lie? You'd be acting. Think of it as temporary employment." Victoria studied Maya's worn uniform, her calculating gaze taking in every detail of Maya's obvious financial struggles. $50,000 for one evening, enough to solve whatever problems brought you to work 3 jobs. Maya's mind raced. $50,000 could pay off her grandmother's medical debt, cover rent for months, maybe even let her finish her accounting certification. But something about this felt wrong. Dangerous even. Why me? "Mr. Blackwood has specific requirements. You're educated. I've done my research on your background before nursing school. You're attractive but not flashy. Most importantly, you need the money badly enough to say yes." The bluntness stung, but Maya couldn't argue. Victoria was right. She was desperate. "I need to think about it. The offer expires tonight." Victoria slid an envelope across the counter, half the payment up front as a show of good faith, the rest tomorrow after the event. Maya stared at the envelope, her hands shaking slightly. $25,000, more money than she'd ever seen at once. What exactly would I have to do? Attend a dinner at the Drake Hotel. Smile. Make small talk. Play the devoted wife. For his business associates, Mr. Blackwood will handle the rest. The diner's bell chimed as the last customer left. Maya was alone with Victoria, and a decision that could change everything. Outside, the Chicago skyline glittered with promise and possibility, each light representing dreams she'd had to abandon. "I'll do it," she heard herself say. Victoria smiled, the first genuine expression she'd shown. "Excellent. A car will pick you up tomorrow at 6. Wear something elegant. Mr. Blackwood appreciates authenticity." As Victoria left, Maya stared at the envelope in her hands. She'd just agreed to deceive some of the most powerful people in Chicago. But for the first time in months, she felt something other than exhaustion. She felt hope. The Blacktown car felt like a cocoon of luxury, as it glided through Chicago's Gold Coast. Maya smoothed the navy silk dress Victoria had delivered that morning. Simple but clearly expensive, fitting her perfectly despite never having been measured. Someone had done their homework. The Drake Hotel rose before them like a monument to old money, its limestone facade glowing in the early evening light. Maya's palms were sweating despite the cool November air. She'd Googled Alexander Blackwood obsessively all day, memorizing facts about his company, his charitable foundations, even his college achievements. But all the articles painted him as more myth than man, the boy genius who'd inherited his father's small software company at 22 and built it into a tech empire worth billions. "Mrs. Blackwood?" The driver's voice startled her from her thoughts. "I'm sorry, what?" "We've arrived. Mr. Blackwood is waiting in the penthouse suite." The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt eternal. Maya checked her appearance once more. In the mirrored walls, her dark hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, courtesy of the stylist Victoria had arranged. She looked the part of a billionaire's wife, but inside she felt like a fraud. The elevator opened to reveal a private foyer. A single door stood ahead, marked with a discreet brass nameplate. Maya knocked, her heart hammering. "Come in." The voice was deeper than she'd expected, with a slight roughness that suggested too many late nights and too much coffee. She pushed, opened the door, and stepped into a world of understated luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city sprawling below, while tasteful modern furniture created intimate conversation areas. Alexander Blackwood stood with his back to her, silhouetted against the windows. Even from behind, his presence filled the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that probably cost more than her car. When he turned, Maya's breath caught. The magazine photos hadn't captured the intensity of his green eyes or the way his dark hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it. There was something almost vulnerable in his expression, quickly masked by practiced composure. "You must be Maya." He crossed the room with confident strides, extending his hand. "Alexander." His handshake was firm, warm, and lasted a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for doing this. I know it's unusual. That's one word for it." Maya found her voice, grateful it came out steadier than she felt. A ghost of a smile played at his lips. "Direct. I like that." He gestured toward the sitting area. "We should go over the details before we head down. The Hendersons, the family we're meeting, knew my late wife, Catherine. She died in a car accident 3 years ago." Maya sat carefully, hyper-aware of every movement. "I'm sorry for your loss." Something flickered across his features. Pain, carefully controlled. "The Hendersons have been pushing me to remarry. Tonight's dinner is crucial for a merger with their tech company, but they're traditional. They believe business partnerships should reflect personal stability. So you need a wife to close a deal. Essentially, yes." Alexander poured 2 glasses of wine from a bottle that probably cost more than Maya's monthly salary. "I could have hired an actress, someone more experienced at this sort of thing." "Then why didn't you?" He studied her for a long moment, his green eyes searching her face. "Because when I saw your photo, something about you seemed real, authentic. In my world, that's rare." Maya accepted the wine, their fingers brushing as he handed her the glass. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her system. "What do I need to know about your late wife?" Catherine was a pediatric surgeon. We met at a charity gala for children's cancer research. She was brilliant, dedicated, beautiful. His voice grew distant. "She would have hated this arrangement." "Then, why?" "Because she's gone and I have responsibilities. Employees, shareholders, commitments that can't wait for me to process grief." The rawness in his voice caught Maya off guard. For a moment, the billionaire mask slipped, revealing someone human underneath. "What's my story? How did we meet?" Alexander set down his wine, moving to the window. The city lights reflected in the glass, creating a double image. The powerful businessman and his shadow. "We met at a bookstore. You were reading Steinbeck in the poetry section. We talked for hours about literature, about dreams deferred and second chances. He turned back to her, and Maya saw something vulnerable in his expression. "You're getting your accounting degree while working to support your grandmother. We fell in love over shared struggles and quiet moments." Maya's throat tightened. The story was too close to her real life, too intimate. "How do you know about my grandmother?" "Research is part of due diligence." But his tone had gentled. "Maya, I want you to know, this isn't just about the money for me. I could have found someone else, someone who wouldn't question the arrangement, but there's something about you." He didn't finish the sentence, but Maya felt the weight of unspoken words between them. The evening light caught the sharp angles of his face, and she realized this man carried burdens she couldn't imagine. "We should go," Alexander said, checking his watch. "The Hendersons don't like to be kept waiting." As Maya stood, smoothing her dress, she caught her reflection in the darkened window. For just a moment, she looked like she belonged in this world of luxury and power. But belonging and pretending were two very different things. The Drake's main dining room buzzed with the quiet energy of Chicago's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables where deals worth millions were discussed over perfectly prepared meals. Maya felt exposed under the soft lighting, acutely aware that she was surrounded by people who could buy and sell her entire neighborhood without thinking twice. Alexander's hand rested at the small of her back as they were led to their table, the touch both protective and possessive. Should have felt strange, this intimacy with a man she'd met 20 minutes ago, but instead it anchored her in the surreal situation. "There they are," Alexander murmured near her ear, his breath warm against her skin. The Hendersons rose as they approached. Robert, a silver-haired man with keen eyes that probably missed nothing, and his wife Margaret, elegant in pearls and understated diamonds. Both radiated the confidence that came with generational wealth. "Alexander," Margaret embraced him warmly, the gesture of someone who'd known him for years. "And this must be the mysterious wife we've heard so little about." Maya felt Alexander, tense slightly beside her. "Robert, Margaret, I'd like you to meet Maya. We've been keeping things quiet while she finishes her studies." "Smart and beautiful," Robert said, shaking Maya's hand with the assessing gaze of a man accustomed to evaluating people quickly. "What are you studying, my dear?" "Accounting," Maya replied. Grateful, her voice came out steady. "I'm working toward my CPA certification." "Practical," Margaret observed with approval. "So many young women today have their heads in the clouds. It's refreshing to meet someone grounded." As they settled into their seats, Maya caught Alexander watching her with something like surprise. Had he expected her to stumble already? The conversation flowed around topics she'd researched obsessively: market trends, the upcoming merger between Blackwood Industries and Henderson Tech, the challenges of maintaining family values in corporate culture. Maya listened carefully, occasionally adding thoughtful questions that demonstrated interest without overstepping. "You know," Margaret said as their appetizers arrived, "Catherine used to say that behind every successful man was a woman making sure he remembered to eat proper meals and sleep occasionally." The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Maya felt Alexander go still beside her, his hand finding her knee under the table. Whether for comfort or warning, she couldn't tell. "Catherine sounds like she was a remarkable woman," Maya said carefully. "Alexander's told me so much about her work with children. It must have been incredibly fulfilling to save lives every day." "She was special," Robert agreed. "We worried Alexander might never find someone who could understand that kind of pressure, that dedication to something larger than yourself." Maya felt the weight of expectation, the unspoken comparison to a ghost she could never measure up to. But then, Alexander's fingers tightened on her knee, not possessive but supportive, and she found her footing. "I think anyone who truly loves someone wants to support their calling," she said. "Whether that's medicine or building something that employs thousands of people. Love isn't about competing with someone's purpose. It's about understanding it." Alexander's sharp intake of breath was almost inaudible, but Maya caught it. When she glanced at him, his green eyes held an expression she couldn't quite read. Beautifully put, Margaret said, raising her wine glass. To understanding. The dinner progressed smoothly after that. Maya found herself genuinely enjoying the conversation, particularly when Robert discussed his early struggles building Henderson Tech from his garage. His stories reminded her of her own grandfather's tales of immigrating to America, with nothing but determination and a willingness to work 18-hour days. The merger makes perfect sense, Robert was saying as their main courses arrived. Both companies share the same values: innovation, integrity, family commitment. That's becoming rare in today's corporate landscape. Family has always been central to how I conduct business, Alexander replied. Maya's helped me see that even more clearly. The lie should have felt uncomfortable, but something in Alexander's tone suggested it wasn't entirely fabricated. Maya caught him looking at her again, his expression thoughtful. Speaking of family, Margaret interjected with the kind of smile that suggested dangerous territory ahead. When can we expect an announcement? You two have been married, what, 6 months now? Maya's heart stopped. 6 months? That hadn't been in any of their preparation. We're taking things slowly, Alexander said smoothly, but Maya could feel tension radiating from him. Maya's focused on finishing her certification, and with the merger— Oh, nonsense, Margaret waved dismissively. There's never a perfect time. Besides, you're not getting any younger, Alexander. 34 is practically middle-aged for starting a family. Maya felt Alexander's hand tighten again on her knee, and suddenly she understood. This wasn't just about closing a business deal. The Hendersons were trying to manage Alexander's personal life, pushing him toward the kind of conventional family structure they approved of. We've talked about it, Maya heard herself say, her voice carrying the kind of intimate warmth that only came from shared secrets. But we want to be sure we can give children the attention they deserve. Alexander's work is demanding, and I want to be established in my career first. Sensible, Robert nodded approvingly. Too many couples rush these things, but Margaret wasn't satisfied. Still, you don't want to wait too long. Catherine always said she wanted children young enough that she could keep up with them. The comment hit like a physical blow. Maya felt Alexander go rigid beside her, saw the flash of pain across his features before he could hide it. In that moment, she stopped seeing him as the billionaire who'd hired her and saw him as a man still grieving, still being pushed to replace something irreplaceable. Without thinking, Maya reached over and took his hand, threading their fingers together with natural ease. Catherine sounds like she would have been an amazing mother, Maya said gently. But every love story is different, isn't it? What worked for one couple might not be right for another. Alexander's fingers tightened around hers, and she could feel some of the tension leave his shoulders. When he looked at her, there was something raw and grateful in his expression. Exactly, he said quietly. Maya and I are writing our own story. The rest of the dinner passed without incident, but Maya found herself hyper-aware of every glance Alexander sent her way. Every moment their hands brushed, reaching for water glasses. Every time he laughed at something she said with what seemed like genuine delight rather than performance. By the time they said goodbye to the Hendersons, with promises to have dinner again soon and veiled hints about expecting good news in the coming months, Maya felt emotionally drained. The performance had been successful, but it had cost her something she hadn't expected. She'd started to care about the man behind the billionaire facade. Before continuing with the story, I'd like to take a moment to ask for your help. If you're enjoying this story, please help the channel reach the goal of 1,000 subscribers. I'd truly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Now, back to the story. The elevator ride back to Alexander's suite was silent, but it wasn't the comfortable quiet of earlier. Maya stared at her reflection in the polished doors, trying to process the evening's emotional whiplash. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, elegant, composed, someone who belonged in 5-star hotels and power dinners. You did well tonight, Alexander said as they entered his suite. He moved immediately to the bar, pouring himself a generous measure of whiskey. Better than well, actually. The Hendersons were completely convinced. Maya kicked off her heels, her feet aching from the unaccustomed height. Is that what matters? That they were convinced? Alexander paused, the glass halfway to his lips. Of course, that was the point of the entire exercise. But something in his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as her. Maya watched as he loosened his tie, the gesture somehow more intimate than anything that had happened during their public performance. Can I ask you something? Maya settled onto the sofa, tucking her legs under her. Why did you really choose me? And please don't say it was because I looked authentic in my employee file photo. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights. When Victoria first suggested this arrangement, I was skeptical. I've spent years building walls between my public and private life. The idea of letting a stranger into that space, even temporarily. He took a sip of whiskey. But then I saw your photo, read your background. You were working 3 jobs to support your grandmother while pursuing a degree. It reminded me of myself at your age. You worked 3 jobs? A bitter smile crossed his lips. 2 jobs in night school. My father built Blackwood Industries from nothing, but he died when I was 22, leaving behind more debt than assets. Everyone expected me to sell, to take whatever buyout offer came along. Instead, I worked 100-hour weeks for 3 years straight, turning the company around. Maya felt something shift in her understanding of him. That must have been incredibly lonely. It was, but necessary. Alexander turned from the window, studying her with those intense green eyes. Tonight, watching you with the Hendersons, you weren't just playing a role. You genuinely cared about the conversation, about them as people. That's rare in my world. Maybe you need to expand your world. The words slipped out before Maya could stop them, and she immediately regretted the presumption. But Alexander didn't look offended. Instead, he seemed almost amused, spoken like someone who's never had their every move analyzed by shareholders and board members. He moved to sit across from her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated. Do you know what it's like to have every relationship questioned for ulterior motives? Every friendship evaluated for potential conflicts of interest? Maya thought about her own life, the genuine warmth of her co-workers at the diner, her grandmother's unconditional love, the way her neighbor always checked on her when she worked late shifts. Simple connections, but real ones. It sounds exhausting, she said honestly. It is. Alexander's voice was quiet now, almost vulnerable. Catherine was the exception. She saw through all of it, the money, the power, the public image. She fell in love with the guy who used to eat cereal for dinner because he forgot to go grocery shopping. What happened to him? That guy? Alexander was quiet for so long Maya thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. He died with her. The rawness in his admission hit Maya like a physical blow. She could see the boy he'd been. Driven, lonely, working himself to exhaustion to prove he was worthy of his father's legacy. And she could see the man Catherine had loved, someone genuine beneath all the armor. I don't think he did, she said softly. Alexander's head snapped up, his eyes sharp with something between hope and defensiveness. What? Die with her. I think he's still there, under all the walls you've built. Maya chose her words carefully, aware she was stepping into dangerous territory. Tonight, when Margaret made that comment about Catherine wanting children, I saw him. When you talked about your early struggles, when you laughed at Robert's stories, that wasn't the billionaire CEO. That was someone real. You don't know me. No, I don't. But I spent 4 hours pretending to be married to you, and pretending only works if there's some truth underneath it. Maya leaned forward, drawn by something she couldn't name. What I saw tonight was someone who's forgotten how to let people get close. Alexander stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. Not the polished chuckle she'd heard at dinner, but something raw and genuine. Christ, Maya, I hired you to play a role for one evening, and here you are psychoanalyzing me. Sorry. Occupational hazard of growing up with a therapist grandmother. Is that what she did? Before the dementia, yes. Dr. Elena Chen, family counselor for 40 years. She always said the people who claim they don't need anyone are usually the ones who need connection most. Alexander set down his whiskey, running a hand through his dark hair. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She is. Even now, in her clearer moments, she still sees right through people's defenses. Maya paused, then added quietly, "She'd like you. How can you possibly know that? Because under all the armor, you're kind. The way you made sure I was comfortable tonight, how you protected me from Margaret's more pointed questions, even arranging for my dress and hair to be done. None of that was necessary for the business deal. You did it because you cared about my comfort." Alexander looked stunned, as if no one had ever seen those small gestures as significant. "The evening's over," he said finally, but there was no dismissal in his tone. "I should arrange for the car to take you home." Maya nodded, though something in her chest tightened at the thought of leaving. She stood, smoothing her dress, suddenly aware that this was goodbye. Tomorrow she'd go back to her 3 jobs and overdue bills, and Alexander would return to his world of board meetings and power lunches. This had been one night, a beautiful illusion that was never meant to last. "Maya?" Alexander's voice stopped her as she reached for her shoes. "Yes, thank you. For tonight, He struggled with the words. "For reminding me that some things are worth more than money." Their eyes met across the elegant room, and Maya felt something electric pass between them. Not the staged intimacy of their public performance, but something real and dangerous and entirely unexpected. "You're welcome," she said softly, and meant it more than she'd meant anything in a long time. 3 weeks later, Maya was restocking coffee supplies at the diner when her manager approached with an expression she couldn't read. "Maya, there's someone here to see you." She looked up from the inventory sheet, expecting to see one of her regulars or maybe her night school classmate, who sometimes stopped by after class. Instead, Victoria Sterling stood by the entrance, looking as polished and out of place as she had that first night. Maya's heart jumped. "I'll be right there." She smoothed her uniform and walked over, hyper-aware of the contrast between Victoria's designer coat and her own coffee-stained apron. "Victoria, I wasn't expecting to see you again. May we speak privately?" Victoria's tone was carefully neutral, but Maya caught something urgent beneath it. They stepped outside into the crisp December air. Chicago's downtown sparkled with early holiday decorations, the streets busy with afternoon shoppers and office workers grabbing late lunch. "Mr. Blackwood would like to see you," Victoria said without preamble. Maya's stomach did a complicated flip. She'd tried not to think about Alexander over the past 3 weeks, but he'd haunted her thoughts anyway. The memory of their conversation, in his suite, the vulnerability she'd glimpsed behind his carefully constructed walls, the way he'd looked at her when she'd said goodbye. It had all felt too real, too intense for something that was supposed to be just business. The Hendersons. "Want to meet again?" "No, the merger went through successfully. This is personal." Personal. The word sent a shiver through Maya that had nothing to do with the cold wind. "I don't understand." Victoria studied her for a moment, and Maya had the unsettling feeling. She was being evaluated once again. Mr. Blackwood has been different since that evening. Distracted. He's made several unusual decisions that have concerned the board. "What kind of decisions?" "He's restructured the employee benefits package, adding mental health coverage and emergency hardship funds. He's also established a scholarship program for adult learners pursuing accounting degrees." Victoria paused meaningfully. "The scholarship is specifically for single women supporting elderly family members." Maya's breath caught. "He wouldn't." "The program launches next month. The application deadline is Friday." They stared at each other in the December afternoon, unspoken implications hanging between them like possibilities neither wanted to acknowledge. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Victoria said carefully, "I've worked for Alexander Blackwood for 8 years. I've never seen him create a scholarship program based on one conversation with a stranger." And I've never seen him stare out his office window like he's lost something he didn't know he wanted. Maya's chest tightened. Victoria, there's more. The Henderson Tech merger included a clause requiring ongoing social collaboration between the companies. They're hosting a Christmas gala next week. Alexander needs to attend. With his wife. With his wife. Victoria's expression softened slightly. He could hire another actress. Lord knows there are enough qualified candidates in Chicago, but he asked for you specifically. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decision pressing down on her. 3 weeks ago, she'd walked away from Alexander's suite knowing it was over, that whatever connection she'd felt was just the result of an unusual situation and too much wine. But standing here now, learning that he'd thought about her enough to create opportunities that could change her life, what would be different this time? The compensation would be the same. But Maya... Victoria hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. I don't think this is about the business arrangement anymore. I think he's trying to see you again without admitting why. The honesty in Victoria's admission shook Maya more than any amount of money could have. She thought about Alexander's expression when she'd challenged him about letting people get close. The way he'd thanked her for reminding him that some things were worth more than money. If I say yes, then you'll be playing with fire, Victoria said bluntly. Alexander Blackwood doesn't do casual relationships. He's either completely closed off or completely invested. There's no middle ground. Maya thought about her grandmother, who despite her failing memory still sometimes looked at Maya with perfect clarity, and asked when she was going to stop settling for safe choices and start taking chances on the things that might actually make her happy. When is the gala? Saturday evening. Same arrangement as before, car, dress, everything provided. Maya pulled her coat tighter against the wind, watching the city bustle around them. Somewhere in one of those glass towers, Alexander was probably in a meeting, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. But he was also thinking about her enough to create a scholarship program that could change her future. I need to know something first, Maya said finally. Is he okay? Since his wife died, I mean really okay? Victoria's expression grew thoughtful. Catherine died 3 years ago. For 2 years and 11 months, Alexander functioned exactly as you'd expect. Perfectly professional, completely closed off, focused entirely on work. But these past few weeks, she shrugged. It's like someone reminded him he's human. Maya made her decision before she could talk herself out of it. Tell him yes. Victoria smiled, the first completely genuine expression Maya had ever seen. From her, I was hoping you'd say that. As Victoria walked away, Maya remained on the sidewalk watching the city flow around her. In 4 days, she'd put on another beautiful dress and pretend to be Alexander Blackwood's wife again. But this time she suspected the pretending might be the most dangerous part, because this time, she was afraid she might not want it to be pretend at all. Saturday evening arrived with the first snowfall of the season, Chicago transforming into a winter wonderland that made the city look magical, despite its urban grit. Maya stood before the mirror in her bathroom, hardly recognizing herself in the emerald green gown that had arrived that afternoon. It was more daring than the navy dress from their first evening, a deep V-neck that highlighted her collarbones, a flowing skirt that made her feel like she was floating. The knock on her door came at exactly 6 o'clock, but when she opened it, instead of the usual driver, Alexander himself stood in the hallway. He looked devastating in his black tuxedo, his dark hair slightly mussed from the wind, snowflakes melting on his shoulders. But it was his expression that stopped her breath, wonder, hunger, and something that looked dangerously like hope. "You're here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't stay away," he replied, and the honesty in his admission made her heart race. They stared at each other in her modest apartment doorway, the weight of 3 weeks apart, and all the unspoken feelings between them crackling in the air. "Like electricity, Maya," Alexander said softly. "We need to talk."